What do ordinary table salt and your next new electric car have in common? You might think I've absolutely lost my mind for asking a question like that. But hang on, because this could actually end up revolutionizing the entire car industry, at least as I see it. Today, I'm going to talk about CATL's new NAXTRA battery technology. And I promise you, by the time we're finished here in about 20 minutes, you'll see salt in a whole new light. But first, welcome to the Car Podcast. My name is Jacob. Let me start with the big question. Have you ever noticed that your electric car seems a bit sluggish on those icy cold winter mornings? Or maybe you've wondered, why do these batteries cost so insanely much? Or why does the cold shorten the range of my electric car's battery so much when I'm driving my EV in the winter? If you answered yes to even one of these questions, then this episode of the Car Podcast is exactly what you need to watch or listen to. The first thing I want to talk about today is a problem that everyone knows about, but no one ever talks about. So let me start with the uncomfortable truth. You might already know it. It has gotten very cold outside at night. It is minus 15 degrees and you have to go to work. Your electric car has lost half of its range overnight. And why does that happen, you might wonder? Well, it is because lithium-ion batteries get sluggish in the cold. It is actually a bit like us humans. We also move more slowly. When it's cold, unless we can see that there's a fire burning over there and we want to go over and warm ourselves by the embers. But that's a whole other story. Batteries, of course, don't have eyes, so they can't see that. So that's why it's kind of the same thing happening in your battery. That is, it becomes slower and more sluggish when it's cold. But what if I told you that there is a battery that can actually retain 90% of its power even at minus 40 degrees? Minus 15 degrees suddenly seems like nothing when we can easily handle minus 40 degrees with this brand new battery technology. That is so incredibly cold that your nose would literally freeze solid in just a few seconds if you, well, you know. And here comes the first big reveal. CATL's new NAXTRA battery actually uses sodium instead of lithium. Yes, you heard that correctly. This is actually salt. So the same salt you put on your fries is actually the key to the entire future of electric cars. But wait, you might be thinking to yourself, if salt is, it sounds so fantastic, so why isn't anyone already using it in the battery industry today? And yes, that's actually a very good question, because to truly understand that, we first need to take a little trip back to chemistry class. If we think a bit about the sodium wars, which is like David versus Goliath in the battery world, imagine lithium and sodium as two brothers. They look very much alike, and they actually belong to the same periodic table group, that is the exact same family in the periodic system. Lithium is like the small, incredibly fast brother, while sodium is more like the big, strong brother. The problem is just that in the world of battery technology, we've always believed that being smaller and faster was much better. I think so myself too, mostly because I'm not that tall. Lithium ions are very small. They're quite easy to move around inside the battery. Sodium ions, however, are like trying to push a full-size soccer ball through a tiny keyhole that's only made for the size of a marble, a tennis ball. But here, it actually gets really interesting because this is something that CATL has been working on for quite some time now. They have basically redesigned or completely re-engineered this keyhole structure from the ground up. They've simply invented a brand new material with fantastic names like Prussian blue and hard carbon. And that makes it possible for these large sodium ions to move freely throughout the entire battery. It's like building a house with much wider doors so your big friend can walk through easily, can come to visit, even if they've spent a bit too much time on the exercise machines. And the result? It's a high-performance battery that matches lithium iron phosphate with 175 watt-hours per kilo. That might not sound super exciting, 175 watt-hours per kilo, but it actually means that an electric car equipped with such an extra battery could drive up to 500 kilometers on a single charge, using the standard battery sizes we know and use in cars today. But there's some absolutely crazy math behind these batteries, so now we're going to talk about those numbers in a way that actually makes sense. Imagine for a moment that your battery is exactly like your own health. How many times can you get sick and then fully recover before your body finally gives up? That is what, in the world of electric car batteries, is what we call a charge cycle. A regular lithium-ion battery can get sick and recover up to 1,000, or somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 times. If it's an NMC battery, that is. A lithium iron phosphate battery is better. Those can handle up to 3,000 to 4,000 cycles. But this NAXTRA battery, buckle up, because it can handle over 10,000 cycles. Let me try to put that into perspective. If you charge your car every third day from 0 to 100%, I know, nobody actually does that, but if you did, then your regular battery, meaning an NMC battery, would typically last 8 to 10 years. Just note that a typical charge is from 20 to 80%, so you're only using 60% of the charging cycle, and that's within a range that doesn't wear the battery out as much. That's why we see batteries far exceeding the 1,000 to 2,000 charge cycles that an NMC battery can usually handle. And that's why we're approaching 20 years of lifespan, depending on how you use it. But the new NAXTRA battery will last over 30 years, even with the strictest calculation. The charge cycles. It's so durable that the battery could potentially outlast 3 different cars. Imagine buying a battery and then it stays with you throughout your entire life as a driver. I don't think that's going to happen, because that would mean you'd have to start thinking of batteries as some kind of plug-and-play solution, a standard that you could then swap into your next car at a favorable price. It would be a bit strange if you go from a Ford to a Toyota, and then you could just take the battery and use it in the upcoming Toyota. That would at least require legislation to make this into a module in some way, so that battery production becomes modular construction. But you're probably wondering now, how much does this cost? Why can seawater help save your finances? Let's play with the numbers for a moment longer. Because how much does a kiloliter cost? Well, it costs about $10,000 to $11,000 per ton. And sodium? Well, it's 600 to 650 kroner dollars per ton. So there is something of a difference here. It's like the difference between buying champagne and then soda. Both can hardly quench your thirst, but one costs 20 times more than the other. On the other hand, you might get a bit dizzy if you have too much champagne, but it gets better because sodium can be extracted directly from seawater. Just think about that for a moment. We literally have oceans full of this seawater that we need. But lithium, well, that can only be found in these. There are only a few places on Earth where this is found, and it takes massive amounts of water to extract it. CATL claims that in the long run, they can produce such a sodium battery for approximately $19 per kilowatt hour. This is a drop compared to today, where the current batteries cost somewhere between $55 and $70. That is a reduction of over 65%. But what exactly does that mean for you? As I see it, an electric car that might cost around 400,000 kroner today, it could potentially end up costing 300,000 kroner or less. Suddenly, electric cars are beginning to become competitive with standard gasoline cars. And not just in terms of running costs, but also in terms of their purchase price. And that might sound strange to you, because we're used to electric cars being cheaper here in Denmark than fossil fuel cars are. But that's not the case abroad, and that's because we've removed the tax from one type of car, but not from the other. Another advantage is safety, because before these batteries end up in an electric car, there is something that very few people actually know. When manufacturers have to transport lithium-ion batteries, they are treated as dangerous goods. They must be charged to a specific voltage, packed in special ways, and there are strict rules for how they can be flown and shipped. And why is that? Well, it is because in the worst-case scenario, these batteries can of course catch fire, and they can even end up exploding. This phenomenon is known as thermal runaway. NAXTRA batteries can be transported at 0 volts, meaning they are completely discharged. In fact, they are the very first batteries to have passed China's new, exceptionally rigorous safety standards for batteries. It's like the difference between transporting fireworks and transporting stones. But the best part of all is that NAXTRA is not flammable, so there is no longer any risk of thermal runaway. This makes it is perfect for areas where safety is absolutely crucial and you need to reach the highest level possible, like indoor energy storage, for example, close to homes, or for use in the demanding aviation industry. Try to guess why Norwegians will love this brand new battery. And here I return to the problem I started with, namely the freezing temperatures at the beginning of this episode. Have you ever wondered why electric cars are so popular in Norway despite the bitter cold weather? It is simply because Norwegians are probably a bit more pragmatic than we are here in Denmark. They simply accept the limitations and organize their daily lives around them. But imagine an electric car that does not have these limitations. A car that almost keeps its full range, even when the thermometer shows -40 degrees. NAXTRA can do exactly that. And not only do they maintain their range, they can also charge faster in the cold. I am talking about a complete game changer. 80% charge in about 15 minutes, even in Arctic weather. That really says a lot about this new battery. But I've also looked a bit into the strategy that CATL is using. And here's where my own little bit of armchair philosophy comes in. CATL isn't just making a battery, they're basically completely redesigning the market. They have something they call freeway dual power. It's a system that combines sodium and lithium batteries in the same car. You can think of it a bit like a hybrid battery. The sodium part handles the daily charging and provides long lifespan. The lithium part ensures extra range for long trips. It's brilliant because it means you don't have to choose between cost and performance. You actually get both combined in one. But the really clever part is that CATL can convert their existing factories to produce these NAXTRA batteries. They don't need to build completely new production facilities from the ground up. This means they can roll this technology out much faster and thus achieve significantly lower costs overall. They are already planning for full-scale mass production by the very end of 2025. However, I'll believe it when I actually see it, because I feel like we've heard that same promise a lot from many other manufacturers lately. But specifically, CATL is the biggest and most dominant player on the global market, and that's exactly why I'm very excited about this. But let me be completely honest with you. NAXTRA is not going to replace all lithium batteries, and it shouldn't either. The car market is absolutely huge. We don't just have one type of car that can do everything. We have sports cars for speed, that is, for high speeds. We have SUVs for families, and we have vans for work. I'm sure it will be the same with batteries in the long run. They'll be produced with the chemistry that best suits the car's purpose. As I see it, NAXTRA is therefore perfect for city cars and commuter cars, vans and delivery vehicles, e-bikes and scooters. And I could also imagine, as I mentioned earlier, using it for backup power at home because it's as safe as it is, and for those really large energy storage systems. The NMC battery with high energy density will still dominate in luxury cars with long range, sports cars, and long-distance trucks. It's not about who wins this here. It's simply about having the right tool for the right job. But when I look at energy storage, this is where most people overlook something. NAXTRA's biggest impact, I don't think it will happen in cars, but rather in your home and in your power grid. But back to the NAXTRA batteries. Just imagine those solar panels sitting on your roof. They produce electricity during the day, but you actually need power in the evening when there's no more sun. That's why you need a battery to store the energy, but lithium batteries are too expensive for that purpose. NAXTRA changes this equation. Suddenly, home batteries become affordable for people with regular incomes, like someone like me, for example. And that means energy independence for millions of families around the world. On a larger scale, NAXTRA batteries can serve as a buffer at, for example, fast charging stations. They charge slowly from the power grid when demand is low. And then they deliver ultra-fast charging exactly when you need it. This reduces the strain on the power grid, and at the same time it also makes fast charging cheaper. It's exactly like having a giant power bank for the whole society. But of course, CATL isn't alone in the race for these salt-based batteries. There's a company called Hina Battery. They've already brought the first mass-produced electric car with sodium batteries to market through the JAC group. But CATL is playing a bigger game. They have announced partnerships with 6 Chinese car manufacturers and have plans for 30 different models in 2026. What's interesting is that CATL already dominates the lithium battery market. They supply, among others, Tesla, BMW, and Volkswagen, and now they're creating their own competition with a technology that could potentially cannibalize their existing business. And why are they doing this? Well, they're doing it because if they do not do it, another person eventually will. And it's always better to cannibalize yourself than to let your competitors do it, because that way you still make money. But what does all this mean for you? Let me just paint a picture of what your everyday life with a car could look like in, let's just say, 5 years. You might be driving a mid-range car with an extra battery, that is a salt battery. The car costs about 50,000 kroner, less than a comparable lithium model. In the winter, it runs just as well on, and just as far as in the summer, except maybe about 10% less. When the battery eventually wears out, that is, in almost 25 to 30 years, it can be sold to an energy storage company where it gets a second life for another 10 years perhaps. Your garage has a home battery with this NAXTRA technology, which stores the power from your solar panels. You've become energy independent and even have the option to sell your surplus electricity back to the grid. And all of this is possible because some Chinese engineers figured out how to make salt behave in the same way as lithium. At the beginning of this episode, I started by asking, what does seawater have to do with the next generation of electric cars? Now you know the answer. The potential is that it could revolutionize the transport sector and the entire energy sector. NEXTRA, as I see it, is not just another battery technology. It can make electric cars accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. It can also mean that suddenly everyone can afford these solar cell batteries, even if you don't have the highest income. And it can help solve the climate crisis by removing these economic barriers to green technology. But perhaps most importantly, it shows us that the solutions to the world's biggest problems are often hidden in ordinary things. And here, I'm thinking about salt. It was right in front of our noses. Next time you look at the sea or put salt on your food, remember that you might be looking at the energy source of the future. I think that's absolutely insane to think about. Thank you for listening to the Car Podcast today. I hope you're left with a feeling that, if nothing else, the future looks a bit brighter than it did before you listened to this episode. And with a whole new respect for salt. See you in the next episode of the Car Podcast, where we'll dive into, well, it'll be a bit of a surprise, but until then, drive safely out there, and remember, the future is much saltier than you might think. See you on the Car Podcast. Take care.